פרק שישי, 6th chapter, משנה א', first משנה. ביאור משנה א'. כבר למדנו בפרק הקודם, we already established in the previous chapter, שהקרבת קורבן הפסח דוחה את השבת. That the Pesach sacrifices pushes away Shabbat. We never learned why. הטעם מובא בברייתא בגמרא, the reasoning is brought in the ברייתא in the גמרא, שלמדים קורבן הפסח מקורבן עולת התמיד. We learn the Pesach sacrifice from the Tamid sacrifice. The Tamid sacrifice are the two sacrifices that were brought each morning and afternoon. בגזירה שווה. And you learn it with a decree called גזירה שווה. You use the same words. What are the same words? It says במועדו. It says in its time. When it talks about the Tamid, you say להקריב אותו במועדו, to bring it in his time. And also about the Pesach, it says to bring it in its time. נאמר בפסח, it says in Pesach, ויעשו בני ישראל את הפסח במועדו, and they would do the Jewish people the Pesach sacrifice in its time, and also בעולת התמיד, when it comes to the Tamid sacrifice, the sacrifice that was brought twice a day, every day, את קורבני תשמרו לי להקריב לי במועדו, my sacrifice you would guard to bring it to me in its time, the same מועדו. מה מועדו אמור בתמיד דוחה את השבת? Just like the Tamid sacrifices pushes away Shabbat, you're allowed to do one of these melachas to shech an animal on Shabbat for God. שנאמר עולת שבת בשבתו, because it says the sacrifice of Shabbat has to come on its Shabbat. על עולת התמיד ונסחה, has to be brought on top of the עולת התמיד ונסחיה and all its accompaniments. מכלל שתמיד קרב בשבת. From here we learn that we bring the sacrifice on Shabbat even though it's a melacha, even though it's one of the 39 melachas. אף מועדו, and we use the same word for Pesach, the מועדו, its time, האמור בפסח דוחה את השבת. So therefore, just like the Tamid sacrifices pushes away Shabbat, also the Pesach sacrifice pushes away Shabbat. משנתנו בא ללמד, our Mishnah though is going to come to teach us, מהם הדברים בקורבן הפסח שהם דוחים את השבת? As we see, it's only the necessary things that can push away Shabbat. So there are some things that has to do with the Pesach sacrifice that pushes away Shabbat, and there are some things that on the Pesach sacrifice that don't push away Shabbat. So we have to see which ones do and which ones don't.
I don't want to get confused. This we talked on now is Shabbos. What happens if you're Friday, then you eat the korban on Friday?
In Friday you have the time to take it home and roast it before Shabbos.
Okay.
Yeah. That's why on Friday you do it an hour earlier, 6:30. So you'll have more time to take it home to roast it.
And then on Shabbos you wait a little bit and then you eat it.
That's right. והיסוד ההלכתי בעניין זה, and the principle according to the law when it talks to this matter, שכל דבר שאי אפשר היה לעשותו לפני השבת, that if it was impossible for you to do it before Shabbat, או שאי אפשר לדחותו עד למוצאי שבת, or you couldn't push it away after Shabbat, הרי הוא דוחה את השבת. So if you could do it before Shabbat, you should do it before Shabbat. You're not allowed to push it. If you could do it after Shabbat, you should do it after Shabbat. Those things that you can't do in between, those you're allowed to do. Oh, I think we have an answer to your question, by the way. You're going to see soon. אלו דברים בפסח, these are the things on פסח, בקורבן הפסח, דוחין את השבת, that they push away שבת. שאפילו חל ערב פסח להיות בשבת, that even though the 14th of Nisan, the day before Pesach, happens to be on שבת, עושים אותו כמו בחול. You made it exactly like on a weekday. Which ones? שחיטתו. First of all, שחיטתו, slaughtering of the animal. שחיטת הקורבן, the slaughtering, you have to. There's not also זריקת דמו, the throwing of the blood, you have to. על המזבח, on the altar. שני עבודות אלו, אי אפשר לעשותם קודם שבת. Obvious, you can't do them before שבת. שהרי זמנם קבוע ליום 14 בניסן, because it says specifically you have to do them on the 14th of Nisan. ואי אפשר לדחותן למוצאי שבת. Therefore you're stuck. You have to do it on the morning. In other words, it tells you have to do it on שבת. שנאמר, ביום צוותו את בני ישראל להקריב את קורבנותיהם. It says, in the day that I commanded the Jewish peoples to bring the sacrifices, you have to do the slaughtering and you have to do the throwing of the blood. ומכאן שביום מקריבים ולא בלילה. So therefore you have to bring the sacrifice in the day and not at night. בעלי התוספות מבארים, שהתנא נקט זריקת דמו אגב שחיטתו. It says, the reason why it says throw the blood, it's because of the slaughtering. שהרי זריקה בכלל אינה אסורה בשבת. Because the throwing of the blood is not even forbidden on Shabbat. You're allowed to do it anyway. There's no melacha there. ומיחוי קרביו. Also, what you have, things that you do on Shabbat, taking out all the insides. It says you can do the taking out the insides after. Why do you have to do it on Shabbat? ניקוי בני המעיים מן ההפרש שבתוכם. It says, why can't you do it in the afternoon? After you sacrifice, take it home and do it at home. Right? You can do it at home later. So it says, no, you can't. שאם יניח עבודה זו עד לערב, because if you're going to take it at home, what's going to happen? יסריחו המים. All the guts are going to go into the meat, and you're going to have meat with dudu. Who wants meat with dudu? והקטר חלביו. Also, you have to do the fat על גבי המזבח. It says, and that's not necessary. Because why? We have a halacha that הקטר חלבים כשר כל הלילה. That you can bring the fat, the entire night that comes after it. So why did you get permission? ואף על פי שהקטר חלבים כשר כל הלילה, and even though they can do it afterwards, they could bring the fat after Shabbos is over. מכל מקום, it says, nevertheless, חביבה מצווה בשעתה, ועיקר מצוותה ביום. It says, it's better to do it, since the mitzvah is right now occurring, and since it is better to do it as quick as possible, we will let you do it also over there. וכיוון שהשחיטה כבר דוחתה את השבת, and since we already did the shechting, and this is just the sacrifice, we will let you. אף הקטר חלבים דוחה את השבת. In other words, if we wouldn't have the shchita, maybe we wouldn't let you, but once the shchita is already there, go ahead. וכן שנו בברייתא, and this is also what to say in the ברייתא, בואו ראו כמה חביבה מצווה בשעתה. It says, look how God, look dearly, look favorably at shechting it at the right time. שהרי הקטר חלבים ואיברים ופדרים כשרים כל הלילה, because even though you can burn all these sacrifice at night, you don't have to sacrifice on Shabbat, אין ממתינין להם עד שתחשך. It says we don't wait until dark, because it is such an important commandment to do it as immediately as possible. אבל צליעתו, but when it comes to roasting the animal, that you can do later, you don't have to roast it on Shabbat. אבל צליעתו, צליעת הפסח, שאפשר לדחתה למוצאי שבת, this is, you can do it after Shabbat, והדחת קרביו, and washing of the meat, הדחת הקרביים במים לנקותם משיירי הפרש, שאם גם מניחם עד הערב אין חשש סירחון, the people eat the insides of the animal also, you know, the parts, kishkes, like we call them. So it says that you can, it's not going to spoil the meat. The dudu is going to spoil the regular meat, but it doesn't spoil the things that it's inside it, that you can clean it later on. אינם דוחים את השבת. That does not push away Shabbat. אלא עושים עבודות אלו ומצאי שבת. You will do all those necessary jobs after Shabbat. Don't do it on Shabbat itself.
Rabbi, didn't the Korban Pesach, they would do it as one piece? That's what I don't understand.
Yeah, you will do it as one piece.
They roasted it
Yeah.
whole.
Yeah. What's the problem?
But how do they give each one a piece of meat to take home to roast it?
Not everybody will eat together. You have to eat in the same group. You will have to eat.
Have to give him the whole. So everything was as a one animal.
One sheep you will do.
One sheep you take.
And you will bring the one sheep on the table, and everybody will take a steak from that one sheep. Cut a piece of that sheep.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
No,
You can't. You're going to see. You're not allowed.
And I was like,
Yeah.
I roast it home.
You will go. You're not allowed to eat it in two rooms even. Everybody has to be in the same room when they eat it. Yeah. So לשבור את הבונס. Yeah. הרכבתו, also הרכבת על קורבן על כתפו להביא לעזרה דרך רשות הרבים. This is probably your question. Also, one is not allowed to bring the korban on his shoulder, to bring it to the azara through the public domain, והבאתו מחוץ לתחום, and bringing it out of the תחום. וכן הבאת הקורבן מחוץ לתחום השבת. Not also to bring the korban out of the area that is designated on Shabbat, the 2,000 amas that we know. And another things that you're not allowed to do is, in other words, if you're far away from Yerushalayim on Shabbat and you with a sheep, you're not allowed to say, I need to bring the Pesach sacrifice. I can bring the sheep on my shoulder into the Bet HaMikdash. You will not be allowed to do it.
אז why can't you take הקרבתו, הקרבת הקורבן על כפו, להביאו לעזרה דרך רשות הבא?
Through the public domain, you're not allowed to bring it.
Why? What do you mean? They don't have eruv?
It's called the public domain, which means you don't have eruv. Otherwise, it will, it's a public domain.
To come to the Azara, they can't take the korban there.
That's right.
So they didn't have in Bet HaMikdash eruv?
It looks like that. Beit HaMikdash they did because it has a wall. But afterwards, into the city, they might have not. There might have been time without an eruv over there. That's what it looks like. Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe it was a time when there was no walls. Yeah. For example, now we know that there's walls, but it might have been after the destruction that the walls were built up. Those walls that we have now are from the second temple, between the first and the second. Maybe there was no walls over there. That's what he's talking about.
It looked like there is no eruv.
Yeah. והבאתו מחוץ... וחתיכת יבלתו. And also you're not allowed to take away the yabelet. Yabelet in English? Like like a scab that the animal has. A wart, thank you. Like a wart. שהייתה יבלת בקורבן וצריך לחתכה. Sometimes there will be a wart on the sacrifices and you need to cut it, and the wart blemishes the korban. If the korban has a blemish, you cannot bring it. But if you take the wart off, then it's a kosher korban. So you can take it off now. But on Shabbat, you're not allowed to take off the warts. So what do? לפי שעושה אותו בעל מום. So it says, because it makes it בעל מום, it makes it into not good sacrifice. ואין מקריבים קורבן שיש בו מום. And you not bring a sacrifice that has a mum. אף אלו אין דוחים את השבת. Says, all this do not pushes away Shabbat. Why? לפי שאפשר לעשות עבודות האלו קודם שבת. It says, check your sacrifice before Shabbat. Why are you doing it now? Or bring your sacrifice into the tchum, into the area that you're supposed to bring it. Don't do it on Shabbat itself. ואף על פי שאינם אלו איסורי שבות, all these are only prohibitions of the rabbis. They're not asur, they're not prohibited from the Torah. שכן בהרכבתו. So he says, because when you're carrying the sheep, if the sheep is alive, we have the rule that alive, anything that's alive is carrying himself. החי נושא את עצמו, it's not called carrying. וכן בהבאתו בחוץ לתחום, also when you bring it from outside the area. ובחתיכת יבלתו, and when you cut off the wart, it says, what the Torah prohibits is to cut the wart with a knife. But if you do it with your finger, דרך שינוי, then it's allowed. כגון שרצחה לחתכה בציפורניו, for example, he wanted to cut the wart with his nails, או בשיניו, or with his teeth, שמלאכה שלך ידי. The Torah permits it, because it's not the proper way to do it. מכל מקום, nevertheless, we still not going to say you should do it, because you had the time to do it before Pesach, so you don't do it now. מכל מקום, אינן דוחות את השבת, מהטעם שביארנו לעיל. Since you had time to do it before, therefore you didn't do it, tough. לפי שאפשר לעשות קודם שבת. ומה ששנינו חותכים יבלת במקדש, but we learned in Masechet Eruvin, if you remember, that when it comes to the temple, you're allowed to take the wart off. Hainu, we're talking about over there, is a different kind of warts. When we get to Kedashim, we're going to see that there's different kinds. There's dry warts and there was wet warts. So before we were talking about a dry wart. אבל כאן מדובר בדרך לך, but over here we're talking about a wet wart. ומכל מקום, כשחותכה בציפורניו או בשיניו, הרי זה כלאחר יד, when he does it with his fingers or with his teeth, it's not the usual way, and even though it's not the usual way, because it's wet, if it would be dry, we'll be allowing you to do it. Because it's wet, we wouldn't allow you to do it. ואף על פי כן אינו דוחה את השבת. So because it's wet, it doesn't push away Shabbat, from the reason we said before. Rabbi Eliezer says, דוחין הרכבתו והבאתו מחוץ לתחום. It says you are pushing away, carrying the animal outside of the boundary, וחתיכת יבלתו דוחות השבת. They pushes away Shabbat. שסובר רבי אליעזר, he says anything that has to do with the mitzvah, you're allowed to do it. Not everything that has to do with the mitzvah, you're allowed to do it. So therefore you can do, in order to get the mitzvah into the place, you're allowed to do it. Let's talk practically in our case. It looks like Rabbi Eliezer and Chachamim. What's the differences? You have a brit on Shabbat. Yeah, you have a circumcision on Shabbat. And the mohel doesn't have the knife at shul. So Rabbi Eliezer would say, not a problem, go ahead, take it. For the mitzvah, take it. And the Rabbanan says, no, you should have thought of that before Shabbat. You could have brought the knife into the shul before Shabbat and leave it there. So therefore you're not allowed to do it. That's exactly what... Yeah. So Rabbi Eliezer says, Af machshivei mitzvah dochim et ha-Shabbat. It says, even machshirei mitzvah dochim et ha-Shabbat. ביארנו את הספר של משנתנו לפי רש"י והרב מברטנורה. We explain the end according to Rashi in the Bartenura. אבל הרמב"ם מפרש לדעת כנה כמה, but the Rambam explains that according to the first Tana in our Mishnah, הרכבתו והבאתו מחוץ לתחום, the carrying of the sacrifice and the cutting off of the wort, איסורן מן התורה הוא. It's not a prohibition from the rabbis. It's prohibition from the Torah. הרכבתו, the Rambam says, because the Rambam says, חי נושא את עצמו, he says, when a living carries himself, is only for a human being, not for an animal. You can use that rule. For an animal, you're always carrying it. הרכבתו לפי שהוא מסע, שלא אמרו חי נושא את עצמו אלא באדם, the Rambam says, a live person carries himself, you only say it by a person, אבל לא בבהמה חיה ועוף, but not in an animal. והבאתו מחוץ לתחום, and bring it outside of the boundary, כדעת רבי עקיבא, he says it's according to רבי עקיבא, הסובר שאיסומי תחומים מן התורה הוא. That Rabbi Akiva holds that the 2,000 amah is not from the rabbis, like we were learning it. Rabbi Akiva disagrees. It says it's a rule from the Torah. The argument is going to be, according to Rabbi Akiva, what's the 2,000 amah, or 1,000 amah, or 50 amah, yeah? But the prohibition, he says, is from the Torah. וחתיכת יבלתו, and cutting away the wort, היינו יבלת לך שיש לחתך בכלי. We're talking about a wet wort that you have to cut it with a vessel. וזו מלאכה גמורה היא. And this is complete work. הילקח כל אלו אינם דוחות השבת. It says that's why, because they're from the Torah, they don't push away the Shabbat. הואיל ואפשר לעשותם מערב שבת, because you can do that before Shabbat. But if it would be from the rabbis, then the Rambam will allow you to do it. ברם, אם יכול לחתוך את יבלתו של קורבן הפסח בידו, but if you can do it with your hand, and then it's only an issue from the rabbis, הואיל ועיני לא איסור שבות, so now it's only a prohibition from the rabbis, not from the Torah, הרי זכותך, the Rambam says, go ahead and do it. וכן אם היבלת יבשה, or if the wort is dry, then it's not a prohibition from the Torah, also you can do it. זכותך אפילו בכלי, you're even allowed to do it with a vessel, שאין איסור שבות במקדש, because there's no prohibition of the rabbis in the temple. ורבי אליעזר סובר, and רבי אליעזר holds, שאף הרכבתו והבאתו מחוץ לתחום אינן אלא איסורי שבות. He says everything is just from the rabbis. שלדעת רבי אליעזר, אף בבהמה חיה ועוף אומרים שחי נושא את עצמו. רבי אליעזר disagrees with the Rambam. He comes before the Rambam. Rabbi Eliezer holds from the Shita that you say that an animal can also be considered chai noseh et atzmo, that a live animal is carrying himself. He holds also, Rabbi Eliezer, that the Isur Tchumim, the entire Eruvin that we learned, is not from the Torah, it is only from the rabbis. Hilkach mutar la'asotan bekorban ha-Pesach b'Shabbat, therefore you're allowed to do it in the Pesach sacrifice on Shabbat, because they're only from the rabbis. Af al pi she'efshar לעשות מערב Shabbat, even though you can do them from before Shabbat, it says, you didn't, don't worry about it, you can still do it on Shabbat according to Rabbi Eliezer, but the Chachamim says no, since you could have done it before Shabbat, don't do it on Shabbat itself, and that's where we are.